There are 4 teams on bye in week 5, and that might make it a little trickier to set a winning lineup, but never fear. We have Michael Fabiano, Sports Illustrated Senior Fantasy Analyst, to help you make the right decisions. Okay, Fab, let's kick it off with the quarterback position. Who is locked and loaded in our lineups this weekend?
Let's see, where's Jared Goff playing this week, Jen?
Home?
That's right. That's why he's a stardom. It's like the easiest stardom sit-em scenario. If he's at home, I'm playing him. If he's on the road, I'm not playing him. 27 touchdown passes and 5 interceptions in his last 11 games at Ford Field. The Panthers have actually been tough on quarterbacks, but I am going against that matchup. I'm still starting Jared Goff. And let's stay in that same division with Jordan Love, who's playing on Monday night against the Las Vegas Raiders in what I'll call the Devontae Adams revenge game. Jordan Love is averaging right around 20 fantasy points per game. The Raiders have been generous to quarterbacks, giving up more than 20 points per game to that position. Jordan Love's been good. I'm starting him over some big names like Joe Burrow, who we're going to mention here in a second.
Yeah, Jordan Love, I believe, last I checked, the QB4 on the season, which is much higher than both of the quarterbacks that you're about to sit, one of which belongs to our favorite team. But go ahead, just give us the bad news. Who are we sitting?
I don't know if I can play Joe Burrow ever again unless he puts up a good stat line.
Well.
Now, I'm doing this because I'm superstitious. And I'm thinking that maybe if I say Joe Burrow is my sit of the week at quarterback, that'll have a big game. I don't know, man. The fantasy gods are cruel. But he's averaging 8 points a game. Like, this is Joe Burrow. His numbers are awful, and it's all about that calf injury. He can't push the ball downfield. And the matchup's really good against the Cardinals, but it was really good last week against Tennessee, and he gave us bupkis. So I can't play Joe Burrow, folks. I'm sorry. I have Joshua Dobbs ranked higher than Joe Burrow. I don't know what planet I'm on, but this is where we're at right now. This is the reality of our fantasy football leagues. And then Dak Prescott. You know, Dak has only had really one good game from a fantasy perspective. He's on the road this week. It's a huge game against the Niners. Their defense, dating back to last year, just 2 opposing quarterbacks playing in San Francisco have had more than 13.8 fantasy points. I guess maybe it's Santa Clara. But this is not a good matchup for Dak Prescott. You may have to start him because there's 4 teams off, but you don't have to like it.
Moving over to the running back position, who should we be starting this weekend?
And this one's kind of low-hanging fruit, but that's all right. David Montgomery, 3 touchdowns against the Packers last week. He is the best fantasy running back in Detroit. I've been saying it since week 2. Jahmyr Gibbs, forget about it. He's a flex starter at best. This is a really good matchup against Carolina. They've allowed 7 touchdowns and the 4th most fantasy points to running backs this season. And I'm also starting Breece Hall. I've got my fingers crossed and my toes crossed because he's been horrible for most of the year, but it's, I guess, the Jets' offense. But this is a great matchup. I mean, Denver's defense has allowed 4 running backs to score more than 20 points. 4! And that includes Devon Achane, whose name I can never get right. It's Achane, by the way. 51.3 points against the Broncos defense. I'm starting Breece Hall, and I actually feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, the Broncos defense is so bad that I actually picked up Zach Wilson for a Superflex league. So yeah, I'm with you. Start players versus the Broncos. I think that's a must. All right, who are we sitting at the running back position?
I've given up on Najee Harris as a regular starter. The last 2 weeks he's had good matchups. Yeah, the Raiders did nothing. He did nothing against Houston either last week. I can't trust him. I just can't. When you look at the numbers, I mean, the Ravens defense is tough on backs. They've allowed just 1 touchdown and fewer than 18 points per game to the position this year. And with 4 teams off, you maybe have to play him, but Najee's been terrible. And then Dameon Pierce. He's had a couple of good games in a row. It's been better, but Houston's offense has been much more explosive through the air than it's been on the ground, to the surprise of just about everybody out there. When you look at the numbers, too, only the Cowboys have allowed fewer fantasy points to running backs than Atlanta through the first 4 weeks. So it's not a great matchup. Pierce is a risk-reward flex.
Yeah, Pierce is questionable until Laramie Tunsil comes back. I mean, that O-line also isn't a good setup for him right now. But, wow, Houston is impressive otherwise. Let's move over to the wide receiver position. Who are we firing up this weekend?
Let's start Michael Pittman Jr. I know he had a stinker last week, but for the most part, he's been really good this year. And the matchup's very good against the Tennessee Titans. I mean, this is a team that struggles against perimeter receivers, giving up the 6th most points. And Pittman in his career, 14 points per game scored against the AFC South rival. And then I'm going to go with Zay Flowers. I didn't love him last week. He was a player that still started in a lot of leagues because Odell Beckham Jr. and Rashad Bateman were out. but this is a good matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've given up 6 touchdowns and the 5th most fantasy points to receivers. So Flowers should blossom in this AFC North matchup. I know it's a bad joke. I couldn't let it pass.
Okay, I'm going to give you a pass on that, and I'm going to ask you to tell me who we're sitting at the position, and I noticed you have one guy on this list who actually leads his team in targets, but doesn't lead his team in receiving yards.
So I'm going to go with Drake London, who scored a touchdown in London last week. Coincidence? Maybe not. I don't know, but we're back on North American soil, and Drake London has been really hard for me to predict, but the matchup's not good. I mean, the Texans' defense has been really tough on perimeter receivers. In fact, no one at the position has scored a touchdown in a matchup against Houston this year. So beware Drake London, and then beware Cortland Sutton. Cortland Sutton's actually been good, right? I mean, you look at his numbers, 11 plus points in every single game, but it's the Jets. He could match up against Sauce Gardner in this one. The Jets defense after 4 weeks have really been tough on perimeter receivers. There has not been a perimeter receiver to score a touchdown against them. So Cortland Sutton is a risk-reward flex this week. Folks, keep in mind, 4 teams off, injuries all over the place. Some of these players with bad matchups you're going to have to play. Just temper your expectations.
All right, finally, the tight end position, our favorite position. Who are we starting this weekend?
Except for not at all. How about Zach Ertz? Like, he's really had one bad game all year. He's getting targeted a ton. He is one of the most reliable tight ends in fantasy football. He has scored 8+ points in 3 of 4 games, including 2 with more than 11. He's become a very popular target for Joshua Dobbs, and the Bengals have allowed the 6th most points to tight ends. So I'm starting Zach Ertz, and I'm starting Tyler Higbee. Now keep tabs on the status. He's a little bit banged up. If Cooper Kupp is able to come back this week, that could hurt Higbee's status a little bit because the targets will be spread out a little bit more. But Philadelphia's defense has given up 3 touchdowns and the 3rd most fantasy points at tight ends. So it's a good spot for Tyler Higbee.
And finally, one of the guys that you may have had high hopes for makes the sit list once again. And I just have to say, like, is there something to, like, if a guy's name is Pitts, should you know it's kind of a negative connotation? Is that like subliminal messaging? Because that's kind of how it's been this season for those who drafted Kyle.
Yeah, I guess so. I actually got to give him credit because he makes writing the sit-em portion of this column for tight ends really easy for me because I always have one. He's not done anything. Hey, listen, Jonnu Smith has more fantasy points than Kyle Pitts on his own team in the last 2 weeks. It's just dreadful. The matchup's not great against Houston. If this were any other position, I think Kyle Pitts would be on the waiver wire. But because tight end is so paper thin, people are hoping that maybe he turns it around, folks. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm not playing him. And then I'm not playing Hunter Henry against the Saints. Henry had a really hot start to the season. The last couple of games have not been as good. And the Saints defense has allowed 1 touchdown and the 4th fewest fantasy points at tight end. So that Patriots offense does not bring a lot of fantasy value here right now. Even Ramondre Stevenson is struggling. This is going to be a really low-scoring game, and I can't play Hunter Henry with any kind of confidence.
Yeah, the Patriots did not look good last weekend versus the Cowboys. I mean, Mac Jones getting benched in the 3rd quarter. They say he's going to start, but yeah, I'm with you. I don't feel comfortable starting any Patriots players right now. Thank you so much, as always, Babs. For all of Michael Fabiano's start sits for Week 5, be sure to visit us at si.com/fantasy.